In this video, we will be talking about two different heavy roast oolong teas, how they were made, and the differences in character that result. Okay, so we're here today tasting two different heavy roast oolongs side by side. They are produced in the same region, Songboling in Nantou County, both at about the same elevation, roughly 400 meters. They are also both machine harvested. These factors specifically make them more economical than their higher elevation cousins who are hand-picked due to the cost of production mainly. And we decided to brew both of these side by side to compare and contrast their flavor profiles that result from their processing methods. So on your left we have a roasted Tsui Oolong, and on your right we have an eco-farmed heavy roast Oolong. They're both significantly oxidized, let's say close to medium oxidation, and allowed to set for a while, at least a few months. In the case of the roasted Tsui, they're allowed to set for up to 6 months before the roasting process begins. And with the eco-farmed heavy roast Oolong, they are allowed to set for up to a year before the roasting process begins. For the roasted Tsui, the roasting process is completed within 1 month, usually 3 to 4 roastings for 10 to 15 hours at a time, and gradually increasing in temperature. The eco-farmed heavy roast Oolong is unique in the sense that the leaves are allowed to set for up to a year, about a year, 9 months to a year before they begin their roasting process, and they're roasted at lower temperatures for a total of 3 roastings, but they're allowed to rest for 3 months in between, and then they're allowed to rest for about a year after the roasting is completed. So that's a year of resting before the roasting, and then 3 roastings over approximately 9 months' time, and then another year of resting. So this takes between 2.5 to 3 years to make this tea, to have the finished product.
Wow.
This gives it a much more mellowed quality due to the fact that it has been roasted more slowly and at lower temperatures, and perhaps more so due to the fact that it has had a lot of time to rest before, during, and after the roastings. We can see the differences in the dried tea leaves. The roasted Tsui looks more like a standard heavy roast Oolong, similar but a little bit stronger or heavier roast than a Dongding Oolong. And the leaves show that they've been significantly roasted as well. They have a little bit of drying and stiffness to it, although they're basically still flexible. This is more of a classic heavy roast Oolong tea with a bold roasted character, as we'll get into as we taste the tea. The eco-farmed heavy roast Oolong, the dried leaves are lighter in appearance, more like a lightly toasted lightish brown as opposed to a dark brown, and the leaves still have some of their green remaining. Despite all that roasting, they weren't roasted at such a high temperature that they got charred at all, really. So one of the concepts when it comes to roasting that can be compared to food preparation is the idea of caramelization of food and what happens in roasting, particularly when you roast at low temperatures for longer periods of time. There is a breaking down of the compounds. The more bitter and astringent compounds become sweeter and mellower. That's the idea behind roasting. And I think that would apply, although I'm not an authority in the culinary arts, it would apply to the concept of roasting or caramelizing vegetables and possibly meat as well. Okay, without further ado, let's have a taste. I brewed these teas 6 grams of tea leaves in 150 milliliter tea judging cups for 2 minutes each. So this is the first brew and the second brew. Roasted Tsui on this side and eco-farmed heavy roast oolong on this side. First brew. A nice balanced roast, but that's what you get, a roasted character of tea, very clearly and upfront. It's not a burnt flavor. There's certain smoky campfire factors, leathery, pipe tobacco perhaps, those kind of deeper, richer tones. Toasted grains. And the eco-farmed heavy roast. We can see that the color of the brewed tea is lighter in the eco-farmed heavy roast compared with the roasted Tsui as well. Also indicating that the roast was mellower, but also that the effect of roasting had time to mellow and become more balanced and integrated with long resting intervals. Yeah, completely different character of tea. Roasted is not the prominent factor in the flavor of the brewed tea. Huh? It's easily accepted that the way that this flavor was attained was through long, repeated roastings, but it's not what you think of when you taste the tea. You don't think, oh, this is very roasted. It's not. It has a very mellow, mild, and very well, let's say, it's a broad spectrum in the flavor profile. Okay, second brew is stronger, a little more obvious roasted flavor notes in the second brew. But there are tangy notes. There's some of what you get from aged oolong, although aged oolong technically is not roasted, and it takes over a dozen years, up to 20 years, to get a properly aged oolong. But the effect of aging in the flavor profile is evident in this tea, regardless of that. Much more complex, tangy, something like a tie guanyin. I think the post-production curing method of this eco-farmed heavy roast has that effect in the way that it brings out a tangy, sweet flavor profile. As you can see, I'm a little bit more intrigued by the eco-farmed heavy roast. Let's go back and give a fair chance to the roasted Tsui. Okay, now that I've tasted the relatively aged one, the Tsui first brew is a nicely chocolatey, kind of chicory, almost roasted coffee effect, although it doesn't taste exactly like coffee. It makes you think of that. Or perhaps the smell of roasting coffee beans. A very hearty, bold character, much more obvious flavor notes. Yeah, campfire smoke, a tiny bit of charcoal, those deep kind of rich but bold character notes. Yeah, it's cowboy tea in a way. It's campfire, leather, tobacco. The roasted Tsui offers a very clearly roasted character of tea, much more upfront in its personality. And in contrast, to an extent, the eco-farmed heavy roast oolong is a mellow, tangy sweet with mellow roasted qualities. Something that's going to keep you sipping and making you think about what you're actually tasting. So if you're into a bit of a more complex heavy roast personality, the eco-farmed heavy roast oolong is definitely worth checking out. If you're just going for a simpler, I want roasted tea, I want the flavor notes that make me think about roasted everything in my experience, go for the roasted Tsui Oolong. Both of these teas are relatively economically priced and worth trying for that reason alone compared with the hand-picked higher elevation teas. The roasted Tsui is a simpler process that takes much less time. The eco-farmed heavy roast oolong is the most complex and time-consuming tea making process that we know of. So that alone makes it worth representing, and we think it really does have an interesting character. So there we have it. Two roasted, we can say heavily roasted oolongs from the Songboling tea growing region in southern Nantou County, Taiwan. Check them out.